Welcome to the Hospitality Maverick podcast with me, Michael Tingsær. We at Hospitality Mavericks are here to inspire leaders to create heart-centered and profitable businesses from the inside out, the kind that both employees and customers love and support. Thanks to BizSimply for sponsoring this episode as our show partner, and BizSimply is the all-in-one HR, workforce management, road and operations software designed and built by hospitality experts to make every shift run like clockwork. And we join forces to help the industry to find new ways to become even more innovative in how we lead our people, how we operate, to how we grow our businesses, to how we serve our customers. Together we want to share strategies and tools that can make the industry thrive long term, not just survive.
I just believe it, more than I ever did, really, that the first question you should ask yourself, when you're looking at growing your business is why are you growing it? Is it just because of this expectation from others and this inevitability that good businesses have to grow? Because, they don't have to grow. I do feel there's an inevitable compromise at a certain size. And maybe it's hard to say what that size is, but I didn't want to make those compromises. I really like, Michael, taking my dog for a walk on the beach, and riding my bike and hanging out with my kids. And that would be really hard if my restaurants were spread across the country. So, kept it local and focused on being better, not being bigger.
This is Mark Cribb, founder and managing director of Urban Guild, an independent hospitality group in Bournemouth in the south of England. He's also the creator and host of the amazing hospitality podcast, Humans of Hospitality. Mark and I have for a long time wanted to sit down to talk about hospitality and being an independent operator. We start out the conversation by diving into Mark's journey in hospitality and the purpose behind Urban Guild. We also talk about their approach to growth, how they build culture, the impact of the staffing crisis, and how to build a real authentic connection with your local community and what the future holds for them. Mark also shares some of his personal learnings as a founder and how he stays on top of his game. We also talk about what he learned from interviewing more than 136 people on his podcast over the years. Before you tune in, please sign up for our weekly newsletter packed with more Maverick insight, strategies and tools. Find a link in the show notes or visit hospitalitymavericks.com. This conversation will give you a great understanding of the challenges of being an independent operator, and it will also give you a lot of optimism for the journey ahead. Enjoy. We are today talking about, restaurants and hotels and independent business and how you actually on top of that can run a podcast, because I'm very impressed with Mark Cribb as our guest today, who's also started a podcast next to running a little hospitality empire on the South Coast, because I know what it takes to run a podcast and also know what it takes to run a restaurant empire, small or big. It takes a lot of energy. So with that said, I'm really looking forward to our conversation, Mark, and it's going to be interesting to see where this conversation leads us, because we had a couple of conversations prior to this, but this is going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's great to finally be on your podcast. I've listened a few times, and you've always sort of been out there in our symbiotic podcast world. So great to finally have a recorded conversation. Really excited.
Yeah, and we have some crossovers as well from a guest point of view. I know that as well. And I know, and we have similar philosophy about what we would like to see in the hospitality and so on. So let's start about that. A bit of an intro to you, Mark, your journey, Urban Guild, and Humans of Hospitality. How did it all come together?
So probably, goodness knows, 20 odd years ago now, I suppose, I went traveling the world and spent a couple of years, all through Australia and New Zealand and Asia and all over the place. And fundamentally, when I traveled, I really fell in love with humanity and people and human beings. And I probably didn't realize it at the time, but it was probably a start of a destiny that wasn't going to be, sat in an office or working in a bank. It was probably going to be working with people. And I'm from a tourism town, Bournemouth, on the south coast of England. And the more I travelled, the more I was sort of surprised, I suppose, that the restaurant sector and the hotel sector in Bournemouth was pretty dated. We're only, as a town, only a couple of 100 years old. But unlike maybe Bristol and Bath and London, where there was a really sort of some cool and interesting boutique hotels arriving and some great restaurants, there wasn't anything in my hometown. So having fallen in love with sort of people and humanity and adventure and conversations, when I came back to the UK, I worked up in London for about 10 years running health clubs and leisure centres, even a golf course for a while. But ultimately, I wanted to get back to my hometown, which is a town I'm really proud of. It's a lovely place to live. We've flanked on one side by the New Forest, on the other side by the Purbex. We're right by the ocean. We've got lots of land around us, so we've got great farmers producing great food. And it just made sense that, I entered the world of hospitality. So started off with buying a really rundown old, bed and breakfast, super chintzy floral wallpaper and wooden clogs on the wall. And, it was pretty horrible. I couldn't really understand why people stayed there. But we bought that and we spent a few years sort of transforming it into this really sort of funky cocktail bar, bistro, boutique hotel. And then, the journey just continued into a couple of other restaurants and a little cafe and a museum, and then ultimately a podcast where I got to chat about all sorts of stuff, and I'm sure we'll touch on a few of those topics today.
And if you have to define that, that purpose around, I guess there's something around humanity, and what is it that make you feel you can bring that alive through hospitality?
Yeah, the thing that I'm really passionate about is for me, hospitality almost as a reflex rather than as a commodity. I get a little bit frustrated by what people, call hospitality and the domination in the world of hospitality of big brands and big business. Because for me, hospitality is what you do when, somebody comes to your house and you say, look, can I get you a cup of tea or a beer, or, I'm going to cook you a barbecue in the garden. And you can definitely turn that into a business. But I think once it becomes, multiple venues, multiple sites, very formulaic, then I get a little bit upset. So, but, in my hometown, starting off with the small hotel, it was just about trying to find interesting people who wanted to spend a few days in the town, would come in, and we would just be really honest, really authentic, really genuine kind of conversation, creating the sort of place that I wanted to stay in with the sort of food that I'd want to eat. And that authenticity of hospitality has enabled me to grow from, one venue to 5 venues at one point. We've taken the revenue from zero to about £5 million. We employ 130 people, but we were never going to make it so big, and we discussed it a number of times. When you're in that period of growth and success, you wonder, is there almost an inevitability of more venues and spreading around the country? But we discussed it as a management team quite seriously and just said, what? Let's do less better rather than more worse. So yeah, I love the genuine side of the hospitality business, but less so the formulaic side.
And what do you think that made you so unique then, as you were creating, your venture and scaling up in Bournemouth? So if maybe not national, you were still scaling the business locally. What made you so unique, and what made it work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing, unique, isn't it? People often say, why are you good at hospitality? How come you do this? And I'm always like, look, I've eaten and drunk and slept, as far as I'm aware, since birth. So it's a funny thing to specialize in, isn't it? And it's a tough industry to be unique in, because everybody thinks they can make an amazing lunch or an amazing dinner. What's tricky is how you scale that up to serve thousands, if not tens of thousands of people per week, and how you look after different people with different desires, and whether they're families or couples, and whether they're celebrating anniversaries or birthdays, or wakes, or whatever their reason is to visit. It really is an art. What level is the music? What type of music? How does the lighting look? What's the customer journey from the website to arrival, to check in at the hotel? And actually restaurants are relatively easy, because you've only got to manage somebody's expectations for a couple of hours whilst they're visiting. But hotels become increasingly more challenging the longer somebody stays, because first day, maybe first 2 days, really excited to be somewhere different. But actually it's really hard to get a better night's sleep in somebody else's bed than it is your own bed. It's quite hard to make cleaning your teeth more exciting in a hotel than it is in the convenience of your own home. So the uniqueness is it's not unique. It is genuine. It's passionate. It's an open book. We're very open with what we do. We probably just built a relationship with the customers, almost one person at a time. In those first few years, I was obsessed about taking this building, and I managed every check-in and every check-out, and I answered every single phone call. I had 5 days off in those first 2 years, and I just lived and I breathed that building. And I would say to my wife, who would, fiance, I would be obsessive about staying open in the bar till 11 o'clock every evening, even on those evenings where it was pouring with rain and I might not have seen a customer for 2 hours in those very early days. And I'd say, look, if one customer comes and I'm not there and I'm not offering a warm welcome and I'm not offering customer service, they won't come back. So I have to stay, front of house. I have to be out there. I have to welcome every single person. And I'd be almost apologetic in the early days because the business and the hotel wasn't as I want it to be. But I'd welcome people in and I'd say, look, I'm really sorry. I don't have loads of money, but we've bought this rundown old building and we're going to turn it into this amazing business. And here's the statement of intent of what it will be. But you're coming in quite early on this journey of what we're going to create. And people just loved that openness and that authenticity. And I think people want to support an underdog. But here we are 17 years later, and there's a real sense of community around what we do. And maybe it's because we work with local schools and we work with local community groups. We have cold water swimming groups that go out from our restaurant on the seafront. We run yoga classes and fitness classes on the beach. And we're very fortunate to have become part of the local community, and they're very supportive of that. But I've never taken that for granted. I still don't take it for granted. I still wake up grateful every single day that people love to come into our businesses. So yeah, I think it's less about being unique and less authenticity is unique. And we've certainly always cared about, where we source our food and seasonality and proper cooked food and, chefs that don't just, pop things in the microwave or pop things in the fryer, and actually trying to do food on a seafront in a tourism town, which is very seasonal and has to scale massively. It's really hard to do good food in that situation, but we've always been willing to put the work in and obsess about the tiny details. But you might have to ask my customers, I suppose, what they find unique, because fundamentally, I think, look, we sell food, drink, and sleep, and lots of people do that.
And you mentioned that thing, but I grasped that thing around that you're building this relationship with the community and both, the people that comes and stay with you, but also the people that is locally all year round you, because I know you said your seasonal business. But how do you build that relationship? Because that's what, many businesses dream of, having that relationship with their near community, because then they know whatever happens, I always have my super fans that comes and support me. And the pandemic have probably been a very good example of that, where, the businesses that had their raving fans that stood with them in thick and thin really felt that was the defining factor.
Really humbling, in COVID, when your customers come in. I remember one of my, very good customers, a chap called Alan Hurt, who comes in, 2 or 3 times a week, probably at its peak times in the year. And, he came up to me and he offered to lend me £5,000 and he said, look, I don't mind when you give it back. I'm not wealthy enough to give it to you, but I'll happily lend it to you and just pay me back when you can. But the number of customers, sort of telling us to do crowdfunding opportunities, I suppose, and the outpouring. And you kind of think your customers like you because there's plenty of competition. There's probably a good 200 or 300 restaurants and bars and stuff locally, so they can go anywhere they like. So you presume that they like you. But yeah, very, very humbling when you nearly lose it all, and when people see that genuine, distress. And because we're very open, I was pretty open about what was happening, and because we're quite well known locally, we'd get a lot of the local TV or local radio would come in and chat to us, and I'm an open book. I'd just say to people, this is pretty catastrophic. In the early days when COVID hit, we probably had about 10 days worth of money left, and the biggest emotion for me was actually employing 130 people, and that all of those people have got families and kids, and you think, goodness me, this isn't about. It is very much about a business I've spent 15, 16 years building and losing it. But at the same time, how are these guys going to pay their rent? How are they going to look after their kids? So when you see the community step in, very humbling. As to how we built that community, again, I think it was just, consistency of message. And that message was, back to what I said, it was one of authenticity. It was just really telling people the truth as you went on that journey, as we were reinvesting their money back into the business over time, and probably even getting them involved in decisions we were making as to what was going to come next, or where should we spend the cash. So yeah, fortunately, the vast majority of people seem to have really come with us, and the power of social media to get that consistent and instantaneous feedback. With Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, if anything, you're constantly barraged by what your customers think of you. So it's really easy to get their opinion, albeit you get the gobby people. You either get the 1 stars or the 5 stars. You don't get many in between, is it? The raving fans tell you they love you, and then there's a lot of annoying people who give you a 1 star for no decent reason. But that's a whole nother story. Don't get me started on TripAdvisor, Michael. My blood pressure will go too high.
Well, we can't have that. I don't want to have the guilt of you falling over here on the show. But I wanted actually to touch you mentioned social media, and then I think we just need to jump back, and then I will come back to the growth question you talked about as well. You launched the podcast, and you've done about 136 episodes of Humans of Hospitality. A podcast I've been listening to myself and shared with my community through our newsletter as well. There's some great conversation in there, really to learn from. And it's more than just about restaurant and hospitality. It's about where our food comes from and on. And where did that come from, and how did that fit in with running the business? Because you have enough on your plates running a business with 130 people.
Yeah, well, you and I both know that it's a time-consuming process running a podcast. So, hats off to you for keeping this one going for so long as well. I think the fundamental motivation came from the fact that I was having a lot of interesting conversations with suppliers or with other restaurateurs, or I was reading a lot of interesting articles. And I'm fundamentally, nosy, but more than nosy, I'm insatiably curious. I love learning. And actually, I think we have a responsibility in the same way as when I get on an aeroplane, I expect the pilot to know quite a lot about how to fly that plane. I think we have a responsibility to understand so much more about hospitality than people would probably think about when they think of our sector. And with that, probably I mean, where does our food come from? But not only where does it come from, how has it grown? And the more questions I was asking of suppliers. So, if you take the early days of fish, probably 8 or 9 years ago, we were looking into the overfishing of the oceans, and we sponsored a showing of a movie by Claire Lewis. I forget the name of the movie now, but we showed it in our restaurants, and she came down and did a talk. And as I learned more and more, I felt this moral obligation to try and walk the tightrope. It was no good just saying, look, we use low energy light bulbs, and we've got coffee machines that remember when we're busy and when we're quiet. But every time I dived into a topic and went down the rabbit hole, ignorance is genuinely bliss, because the more I learned, the more interesting it was, but also the more complicated running the business got. And actually, a podcast is a brilliant door opener, as you all know. So in some ways, I just wanted to learn about farming and about plant-based diets and meat-based diets, and the best way of looking after animals, or the best ways of looking after the lands, and is organic the best thing to do, all this kind of stuff. But also there were some quite inspiring people that I love in the sector. So if you think of the likes of Robin Hudson, for example, from The Pig, or Michel Roux from a chef perspective, or Will Beckett at Hawksmoor, there were all these amazing people, Mitch Tonks from Rockfish, that I really wanted to have a conversation with. And there's no way you could just phone them up and go, hey, any chance I could just come and pick your brains for an hour and a half, because I love hospitality. But as soon as you phone them up and say, hey, I've got this amazing podcast, and here's it snowballs, as you all know. Once you've got 10, 12 interesting people on board, you can say, look, these people have already said yes. They've really enjoyed the process and the journey. They'll happily give me a reference. Any chance I could come in and have a chat? And 9 times out of 10, they'd say yes. And what an amazing privilege it is to then get to sit down in front of your heroes and interview them for an hour and a half. The difficulty is, you've got all of the research, as that goes in, beforehand. You've got the recording of the interview itself. You've then got to listen back to it. You've got to edit it. You've then got to, upload it, and then you've got to do the promotion of it. And that's incredibly time consuming. And it got to the point where, much as I was finding the conversations fascinating, it was probably taking a day and a half of my week. And actually in COVID, which is when I recorded a lot of the episodes, that was okay. But when it got to the point that I needed to reopen my businesses and really focus on rebuilding the business, I thought, I'm going to pause this. And in my head, it's still paused, but I don't have a relaunch date yet, albeit I see things or read things. I was up at the hotel, restaurant, and catering show in London last week, and I went to a few of the seminars and a few of the talks, and I was itching to go up to the people that I'd seen present and say, hey, do you want to come on a podcast? Because I'd love to explore that further. But I managed to control myself, Michael, and remember that I'm supposed to be saying, sometimes what you say no to is more important than what you say yes to.
Yeah, that's very, very important. Have stopped doing lists instead of to-do lists is actually more important in life and business.
Yeah, it's very true. But it takes a long time to learn that.
Yeah, but I hope you at some point that the pause stops again and you can fill out the void of what your podcast bring, really inspiring stories, especially around as our shared thing around, it's not just about hospitality, it's also about the food we eat and where it comes from. And we really need to, as hospitality, play a role in giving people the understanding that food is a complex thing and we cannot just expect it to be around.
Well, that's what's so interesting, isn't it? Is the number of people that are behind the scenes. I often say to my team when I'm training them, when they're new recruits, and I say, look, you've got to realize how many people are behind just one dish. If you just look at a beef burger, then you've got to imagine, yes, there's a beef farmer, there's a potato farmer, but take the baker who's never taken his kids to school because every day he gets up at 3:00 and he's baking his bread by 4:00 and he delivers it fresh to the restaurant. That's an incredible compromise that he's got to make. But then think of the coffee beans that are being dried out in the sun in another country thousands of miles away, and then they're being hand picked to get rid of the rubbish beans, and then they're being shipped over here and they're being roasted to different temperatures by different people, and then they're sent to the venue, and then the barista behind the bar is then making that coffee, and then by the time it gets to the waiter or the waitress, they spill it down the side of the cup, and there's a little bit of soggy sugar in the saucer, and it makes me cry because I'm like, look how many human beings have been behind the journey of just this one drink. And then the customer gets to sit there, and often for round about £3 they get to have this beautiful cup that might have had 25 humans have touched it on its way, and you're like, that is such an exciting privilege. And that's just coffee, Michael. You can do that for every single one of our ingredients. There's somebody passionate about a certain booze or a chocolate or a type of flour that they use in a pizza or cheeses, or it's just such an incredible industry to have so many. And that's why it was called the Humans of Hospitality, because it's about these amazing human beings that might never ever get to the customer. I meet people who were obsessed about what the buffalo were eating to make the best buffalo mozzarella, and they were changing the diet and the type of grass that buffalo ate, because ultimately that would have an impact on what the customer ate in the restaurant. That sort of stuff blew my mind, Michael.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I was in a kitchen in London yesterday, like a startup kitchen, and you were walking around, and the guys I was working with, we were doing our thing. You were listening to these people that was extremely passionate about that type of food. Some of them made dough balls with cheese in, Brazilian dough balls. There was, people cooking pulses. There was people doing some catering, and you could just feel these people as early stage of their business, how passionate they were for those things and the complexity of what they were trying to do. And it sounds so simple to make some cheese balls, but these were not any kind of cheese balls. It was like special cheese. And I really love that as well, because I think that's also the story we need to go out and tell the end consumer that, that it's a complex product you're getting. Actually,
it's not the same everywhere. It's not what you're getting in a massive chain restaurant with a centralized kitchen where you just tear open the packet and the compromises that are made of that quality of food, and of those chickens being imported from Poland, or the beef from South America. It's like, if you go to proper restaurants, and ideally for me, independent restaurants, then those chefs will know they'll know their suppliers. They'll know the farmer by name. They'll know their egg supplier. You're not going to get these issues, when there was horse found in lasagna and all these, ridiculous things that happened. You're like, how is this even possible? We should get back to the fact that, we have an amazing privilege to represent all of these amazing farmers and producers and people. So, go out and support those businesses. So, the reason for the podcast, and it's great that you have these conversations as well, is let's educate people. Let's get them to make an informed decision and realize that, if you going down the high street and on the right-hand side is some just corporate chain monstrosity that doesn't care. And that's not always the case. Some of the chains do care, but some don't. But on the other side of the road is this amazingly passionate independent. Go in and support them, because, otherwise that link to our food will be lost even more than it is. And it's already pretty poor.
Yeah, and it's really like one of the challenges we see now with the supply chain also comes with our disconnect with food and the land. But that's a totally different conversation. I want to come back to the growth question because you said very early on you decided that you had wanted to stay around locally, and I've talked with many other business owners that make those decisions, but often you want to grow a business. It's all about the growth, and it's all about what you can achieve, and then you become the many end up on a journey of cookie cutting the business, and some has been very successful and others have not been so successful. So what was it that made you so strongly make that decision? Because it's because you were successful, and then you would think, why don't you just want to make 100 of this and then check out?
Yeah, yeah, and I'd constantly get asked that, and I remember having one day in particular where we were looking at some of our local competitors, and they were on a growth trajectory, and they'd had some venture capitalist money, and they were talking about getting up to 30 sites or whatever they were doing, and we really questioned ourselves and said, look, we're good at this, we love it, we're good at it, we should just do more. But I couldn't help feel that, where does that pressure come from? Where is this inevitability of growth? Why do we put so much pressure on ourselves that as soon as you've got a successful formula, you have to do more? And although it was tricky at the time, and maybe, some of the decisions were sort of 50-50 as to whether we should or whether we shouldn't. And I suppose some of it is that, we'd have had to get investors and backers in, and that looked like a load of grief. But as I've got older and as I've got further into it, and as I've had more conversations with passionate people, I just believe it, more than I ever did, really, that the first question you should ask yourself, when you're looking at growing your business is why are you growing it? Is it just because of this expectation from others and this inevitability that good businesses have to grow? Because, they don't have to grow. And actually, I respect certain, I mentioned Will at Hawksmoor, for example, and I think that's pretty fascinating because although they're growing, there's never going to be a Hawksmoor like there is a Wetherspoons. There's never going to be 1 or 2 or 5 in every town across the country. They'll pick some big cities, and actually, I really respect that and the level that they can go in and the links that they can make with, their supply chain and the quality of chefs and stuff. So on that side, it's fascinating, and maybe the guys behind Honest Burgers, but I think they are probably struggling a little bit more with that cookie cutter growth. They're very conscious of it, and they're working really hard to try and avoid it. But they're walking the line much closer, I suppose, than Will. But for me personally, yeah, I could never be more convinced and adamant that the right thing to do, because I do feel there's an inevitable compromise at a certain size, and maybe it's hard to say what that size is. But I didn't want to make those compromises. I really like, Michael, taking my dog for a walk on the beach, and riding my bike and hanging out with my kids. And that would be really hard if my restaurants were spread across the country. So, kept it local and focused on being better, not being bigger.
Yeah, and I think also it's really interesting. I've had a lot of conversation around growth and been really interesting in that question because I've, failed in that journey myself as well. Is that it's not just about, growing the top line or the bottom line. It's also, can you actually make, better impact in the community? Can you create better jobs? Can you create better food in your restaurant? And actually, is that success as well? It is. It's a massive success. But we forgot that it's been all about, these, growing, creating the next Starbucks or McDonald's. And maybe there's a reason why there's not so many of them in the world, because it's bloody hard and you have to compromise a lot to get there. And that's maybe not your initial idea and purpose when you set out doing this.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. But I'm really excited. This, one of my venues is actually for sale at the moment, my hotel, and actually, part of the reason for that is just to reduce complexity. It's not to to get out of hospitality and a business that I love, but it is to free up as much of my headspace as possible to just focus on a couple of the key businesses and the opportunities that present, and the noise and the distraction and the opportunity cost of spreading yourself too thin. I absolutely get it for some people, and I'm really pleased for them, and I hope they're enjoying their journey. But I would just say that, just ask yourself why. Do not give in to the peer pressure and the inevitability of growth. You can run a beautiful hospitality business. You can make a very good living. Think about how much is enough. Don't do it for the sake of doing it, or because that is national expectation.
Yeah, and the thing is the outside pressures you talk about as well. That if you're successful, you just have to grow and scale. Another thing I wanted to talk to you a bit about, and that's very closely connected with growth, I think, and what your opportunities are, is culture. And we really see that now, right now, that if you have a strong culture, you are probably in a better position for the staffing situation or staffing crisis. How have you dealt with that over the 17 years, building your culture and doing that? Because again, I believe that if you have a great culture, you also have a great relationship with your customers.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. And again, I don't think that this is but going, what's unique about your business. It's kind of, what's unique about your culture. It comes back to that sort of integrity, and I think your external communication. There's no point going to your customers, hey, we're this amazing business, we care about animals, we care about where your food comes from, we care about seasonality, we care about you, we care about community, and then not looking after your team. Fundamentally, if you're a good business and you're a good human, and good humans often work in hospitality, and they have that hospitality reflex of that desire to look after people. You should have that with your team as well as your customers, really. And I fail to understand how you can have a genuinely authentic hospitality business that doesn't look after your staff. It's like, I don't know. It's like somebody who's obsessed with selling meat that also has a vegetarian section. It's kind of like, I don't know. I think you've got to choose your thing and do one. And if you really genuinely, love animals and animal welfare, and that's your thing, you're unlikely to open a steak restaurant. And if you genuinely love hospitality and you look after people, then you should. It's incomprehensible to me how you could not look after those people well. So I've got people in the business that have worked for me, since I opened it, sort of 17 years ago, which is fantastic. Having said that, not everybody's a fit, not everybody's a match. But you have to understand that. You have to go, look, you're only as good as your worst member of the team, and sometimes you have to make tough decisions. So there will definitely be people out there who says, Mark's talking absolute garbage. He's not a great employer. He didn't look after me. But I would, on the flip side, say, look, if you don't fit, I have to look after the business and the team as a whole, and that my team can only really perform if everybody's on the same page and everybody shares an ethos. And the ethos of our business, we have a hug club. Our loyalty card is called the Hug Club, and it's about give a hug, get a hug. The better you look after people, the better those people will look after you, in the same way that a smile is contagious. So people who fit with this obsession for customer service and for looking after people and this hospitality reflex, they fit in really well with the team. But anybody who doesn't get the theatre of hospitality and the fact that you have to put on a big smile on your face and you have to look people in the eye, and even if you're having a bad day at home, that's fine. Have a chat with us, and if you need to go home and you need some compassion time, that's no problem. But if you're in service and you're in hospitality, then you have to see it as a theatre performance, and you have to put on a big grin, and you have to look after people, and we all do that. So people that get that and understand it, we look after them really, really well. And people that don't, it's kind of like, cool, look, go and get a job somewhere else. There's loads of jobs, even if it's in hospitality. There's loads of other businesses, but if not, there's loads of industries that might be better for you. So sometimes you're doing people a favor by letting them go off and explore other opportunities, because they might not be cut out for hospitality. That's quite a long answer, Michael, but fundamentally it's exactly the same message internally to your team as it is externally to your customer.
And you mentioned one of your touch points was your hug club. Is there any other things that you do, like practically, that is a bit different to boost your employee experience, as they call it?
Yeah, it's hard to think of specific. I mean, we've certainly tried in the past to have nominations and staff member of the month, and cinema tickets for certain people, and gifts. And actually, anytime we've tried to make it formulaic, it's not really worked. When we've tried to encourage people to nominate, we've tried to force sort of monthly gatherings where we put money in the budget, and we were like, right, every month, you can do a party, or you can go karting, or you can do this event or that event, and we try and get the team to organise it. And it always just felt a little bit forced. But now, our head of Hugs, who is the person who was looking after the Hug Club and the Loyalty Club, is the same head of Hugs who also looks after our team. And we'd look for opportunities to praise people. So, it might be that you've just passed your driving test, and if we know that, then we'll make sure that we get you, congratulations. Or if you've just had a child, we'll try and remember to send you flowers. But, probably the best example is recently, where one of my head chefs, needed some help with immigration. He's a New Zealand guy, and he needed to go through a journey and a process, and it was £2,500 for the next stage of his application process, and he's a really good head chef. He's a really good guy. He's worked for us for a few years, and we just said, look, we'll pay for that for you, and kind of like what we want you to do is we want you to stay for the next couple of years. We'd like you to stay for the next decade, but let's say as long as you stay over the next couple of years, you don't have to pay us back. Stay for the next year, we'll go 50-50, and if you leave straight away, pay us back. But I said, look, I'm not gonna write this down. I'm not gonna turn it into a contract. We're not gonna get HR involved. This is just done on a handshake and a bit of eye contact, and it's treating people like that, I think, where you give them respect. It's no good saying that you're going to do that on one side and then tie them up in some legal mumbo jumbo. If it's a genuine two-way relationship, and clearly there's a risk to that, but I'd like to think that we're just showing that we're decent human beings. So yeah, we constantly look for ways to help our team if we can. The flip side being that it has to also be a business. You have to be profitable to survive, and therefore you can't do everything that your team want you to do, but anytime we can, we've got their back.
Yeah, as we come out of here, the pandemic, you also see the staffing crisis, Mark, has really hit the industry. It was already hard, I would say, prior to the pandemic, staffing, and especially in a seasonal business like yours, I can imagine. But how has this impacted you and your business? Have you seen some advantages of really caring about employees and culture in this?
I think if you didn't look after your team in COVID, then your team left, and then you're completely screwed. When everybody tried to reopen, you could see the businesses that hadn't furloughed, hadn't got everybody on the bus, hadn't looked after people. They literally could not open their doors. We had to strip down to a very, very core team. It was a much smaller team than we would ideally have. Last year it was heartbreaking, for us, very seasonal business right on the seafront. And even in July and August, we couldn't get back to full opening hours. We were shut on a Monday and Tuesday evening, which seemed ludicrous. That was 16, 17 years of operation. We've never been closed in core season. But the thing is, I've got one brigade of chefs, and if I broke that brigade, then that's it. I lose the entire season. So I had to look after them. We're now in a period of recruitment again. So the core team is good, but we always need to add to that every summer. I probably need to recruit about 40 people at the moment. And if I can't recruit those people, then I'm not going to be able to open the venues at the capacity that I want. And customers, they're pretty good at understanding it, but they're not, they're certainly not all of them are, and they question how we can possibly run a seasonal business like that and then not open. They want us to be open at those core times. It's too early to tell. It's certainly not easy. It's certainly not like we've put the ads out, started recruiting, and we're like, yeah, great, we're going to smash this season. Here we go. It looks like it's going to be as challenging as last year, but we're not there yet. We're recruiting or interviewing every day. We're trialing. We're putting the feelers out. What we have done this year is we've brought in the service charge and put that on the bills, which is obviously completely normal everywhere that you go in London and maybe Bristol and Bath, but it's not historically been the case in Bournemouth. It's very much been discretionary, so your bill doesn't have it on there. We've put that on. We are a couple of very busy venues, and what we're going out, the message is we've been trialling this for about 6 weeks in one of our restaurants, and it looks like even now in the off season, it's adding about £5 an hour to people's wages. We haven't had a lot of kickback from the customers yet. I'm worried about inflationary pressures, the impact of VAT, plus the 12.5% service charge, albeit that it's discretionary. But at the moment, we're very much using that as a recruitment tool and saying, look, if you want to work in hospitality, go somewhere that's got a good trunk system in place. And if you can go somewhere that's also exceptionally busy, then you can earn good money. And initial indications are that's very positive. But I really hope, for the sake of the hospitality sector, that so many people left and became, DPD or Amazon delivery drivers, or went and got jobs in supermarkets or changed sectors. And I hope that the customer is happy to recognise that you do need to pay service charge in the business now more than ever, and that the team recognise, or potential team recognise, that actually you can earn decent money in hospitality. Particularly students and people in seasonal towns. It's going to put them on. If you think the minimum wage is up to £9.50, if you're adding £5 or £6 service, so you're up to maybe £15, £16 an hour. That's a good wage for anybody, but certainly a student just looking to top up some cash over the summer. So early days, Michael. So again, a long answer, and we'll see how it pans out in the next couple of weeks.
What is your, besides, I guess, recruitment is one of your priorities, and have less complexity was another priority I could hear, but is there other priorities right now you have for the business as we are going into, we say, I guess we're still somehow in the aftermath of the pandemic, but probably a new phase, I could imagine, with the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does feel like a rebuild. I mean, for us, we are very used to now this cycle of sort of, almost hibernate and reopen for summer. But we now have to hibernate much more than we used to, partly because we have a much smaller team, partly because COVID taught us that actually it is okay to close. And actually, we worked out at some periods in COVID, we were losing less money by being shut than we were by staying open. It does make the challenge of reopening even more difficult. So we've certainly got to navigate recruitment. We've got to navigate that complexity. But if I look at the sort of hospitality industry as a whole, we've got massive price pressures, but at the same time, as a huge environmental catastrophe happening on a global level, and recognizing that agriculture and food, what we eat is actually has the biggest impact on the planet, even more so than transport and travel. And I feel, again, going back to that analogy that of the pilot, and saying that we should know about food and drink, we should really understand the impact. And actually that's really difficult, because you don't want to kind of patronize or feel like you're lecturing your customer, but you really want them to understand that how important it is to pay a bit more for something a bit better. And certainly this change around recognizing the overconsumption of meat and dairy, and how do we get more plant-based food on the menu. So the bigger change, and that's not just for this year, but it feels like to me that we've got this sort of opportunity to help educate, and to spend some time holding people's hands, and showing them, not just going to turning into a vegan restaurant, but to say, look, plant-based food can be amazing. Let us show you. Everywhere there was a meat dish on the menu before, there's now also going to be a plant dish. And if we can hold your hand, and if we can show you how amazing some of this food can be, and this isn't about buying something that's equally as processed in a factory in the US and then shipped around the world. This is getting the chefs excited about whole foods and plant-based foods, and holding the customer's hand. So yeah, my biggest challenge at the moment is probably finding chefs that share that passion with me, and then educating the consumer, because although there's exponential growth probably in flexitarianism and plant-based, it's still a tiny proportion. It's huge growth, but still in a tiny percentage. And I didn't come onto this planet to make the world worse. I want to leave it at least as good, if not better. So that's something that I'm struggling to navigate at the moment, but doing my best. And a lot of that probably came off the back of the learnings in the podcast.
And it's super interesting, because we talked about it before, where you're actually taking, you've been on a individual journey about eating more plants, and now you're trying to find out how you deliver that to the masses in a way, because it's difficult to change habits, isn't it? Because it's not just about process and meat, it's about culture, it's about how we connect with food and land, and understand the complexity of we said it earlier in the conversation about how does this cup of coffee actually land in front of me, and what has actually happened to get to there.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, if you told me 6 years ago that would be the current priority in my business, I would have laughed at you. I think if you told me that I would be following a predominantly plant-based diet, I would probably bet my house on the fact that was complete nonsense. I used to get quite angry with vegetarians, being miserable and grumpy, and coming into the restaurants and complaining if there wasn't a V next to a vegetarian dish, and I'd be like, I don't put an M next to a meat dish or an F next to a fish dish. Just read the description and work it out. But actually, my job is to look over the horizon, and to trailblaze, and to understand trends, and to understand what's coming. And I thought, right, I'll try plant-based. I could see the trajectory from one of three things. Either you've got a human health, there's a nutritional element to what we do. Yes, you can go out and have a treat in a restaurant, but if people you're going to be part of the community, and you're going to encourage people to use you regularly, surely we have a moral obligation to look at the nutritional quality of our food. Clearly, you've got the environmental impact, on the planet, and then I think we should have something around animal welfare, which probably I didn't appreciate a few years ago. But the only way for me to really understand it was to go on that journey myself and try it. And I didn't think I'd do it for more than a couple of weeks. And here I am, sort of 3.5 years later. And that's the key thing, isn't it? Constant learning, constant growth, constant fascination, and now working out, okay, how do we bring that into the business and take us to the next level? Like I say, ignorance is bliss. But once you've got knowledge, you can't unlearn something that you've learned. And our job is to learn more about our industry than anything else.
Yeah, that's another challenge by doing a podcast. You just find out that you are so much more responsible for doing something about something you get insight into, if it's food or leadership, whatever. Every time you get a bit smarter, you are, in a way, you should go and use that knowledge, because you can leave the world in a better place.
Definitely, yeah. It's such an exciting part of life, I think, isn't it? Is growth, and I think people who work in hospitality, tend to be maybe slightly more extrovert, slightly more interested, slightly more used to having conversations with people and asking questions. And if you're asking those questions and you're learning, to not to use that knowledge feels like I don't know, inhuman or inhumane.
Yeah. What when talking about hospitality, and you allured a bit to how you see the future, but what is your general like view on hospitality and the world that's in front of us with all the challenges that are still here? They're not gone away, and there's new ones coming with new rising costs. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting quarter because there's so much happening now with VAT going up. It's just a technical thing, but still has a massive impact on business. More, can you get the staff you need? You have the landlords now that has free run as well. What is your view? What's going to happen with the landscape?
It's a really that's a big question, Michael. It's like, oh, we need a whole hour to dive into that one. I'm a deluded optimist. I don't think you can be self-employed and entrepreneurial and work in hospitality unless you're a naturally optimistic person. So I'm worried about inflation. I'm worried about the fact that we can't get team members. I'm worried about the impact of VAT and business rates. I'm frustrated that national government still doesn't seem to understand, despite how well represented we were and the voice that we had around the table during COVID and some of the support that was in place. But I still annoyed by the fact that the hospitality is the happiness barometer for the UK. People have meetings in restaurants. People have meetings in hotels. People going out and looking after their friends or their families, like I say, anniversaries or birthdays or wakes, or hospitality and spending time with other humans. Should be the entire point and the whole essence of our time on planet Earth, and therefore it should be really encouraged. And I don't think it's right that the government are putting up VAT. I think we employ so many people in this sector, and the implications of minimum wage and pension contributions and national insurance is huge. And if you make us prohibitively expensive so people can't go out and enjoy bars and restaurants and hotels, you're fundamentally making the country a worse place. But you're also stifling other businesses and other opportunities. And I just find it depressing and annoying that we can't get the government to understand that. And if they helped hospitality more, I absolutely believe it would not only help the commerce of the country, but I just think it would help people feel good, and we need that. And despite the fact there's going to be inflationary pressures and costs on our fuel and on our food, and clearly what's going on in Ukraine, if you look after hospitality, then that will help people get through these. But on the flip side, we're normally pretty dynamic. We're normally pretty good at finding a way through. I worry that if it just becomes too expensive and too cost centric, that we'll have to start making compromises on some of the gains that we've had around fair trade or ethical trade, or again where our what farmers we're supporting and when our food comes from, and then the worry is that only the big chains can operate in this market, because only they can get the margin, and they get that margin by making compromises that the consumer never knows about, but if they did know about, they probably wouldn't be happy with. And if you squeeze out the independent sector because it just becomes prohibitively expensive, and you're only left with chains that don't support the same infrastructure and supply chain that I think is really important, then that would be really depressing. So yeah, these are the things that keep me up at night, Michael. These are the things swirling around my head, and I don't know the answers, and it's why doing podcasts is great, because you get to hear all these different perspectives. But I'm excited, I'm concerned, I'm annoyed, I'm optimistic, I'm pessimistic, all rolled into one. But yeah, fundamentally, what a fascinating 6 months it's going to be.
Yeah, and you probably describe how many are feeling, business owner or people in hospitality, is that the clarity is not there in a way, and we need to just take one step every day forward, and then believe, as you say, in what we do is the right thing, and then hope that everything's falling in place and the right people are listening to us. Well, over the last 2 years, Mark, you must have had some really, like myself, definitely, and I love to ask this question to people on the podcast. Well, what has your most significant learning been? Because it's been a journey, in life and work, and probably not over yet. We're just maybe all a bit tired, but we're still learning. And you said you love learning. What is the most significant thing, Mark?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. That, I feel like I crammed 10 years worth of learning into 2 years. I mean, we tried to do so much to navigate the pandemic, and we launched home delivery, food box businesses, and cocktails by post businesses, and Valentine's boxes. We tried to do frozen food delivery. We did sort of food collection points. We got into bed more with the likes of Deliveroo and Uber Eats. And actually, through all of those, one, it taught me that we are an incredibly reactive sector. On a personal level, the business and the team around me, they are willing to go through an immense amount of change, an immense amount of learning very quickly, which is really impressive. But actually, all of that learning, going through all of that change, and whilst there's been some successes, in some of these businesses that have put in these kind of systems, I think most of them haven't worked. And actually, what it taught me is, just remember what you're really, really good at. Bringing people into a restaurant and giving them great hospitality and great food and great service is an absolute privilege and joy. And taking food to people's house and delivering it with a delivery driver is much more complicated. If you want to serve 1,000 people in a restaurant in a day, that is possible, and it can be fun and energized and vibrant and energetic. But stuffing food in 1,000 boxes and sticking it in a postal van is a whole other level of complexity. So really what we learn is to focus on what we're good at, focus on the core aspects of running bars, running restaurants. We've actually just got rid of a lot of noise and a lot of complexity, and a lot of the things we were doing, we were building our own space where we were going to have our own butchers and our own bakers, and we were launching these sort of monthly hampers for our loyalty customers, and making our Hug Club loyalty card had 3 different tiers, and we just had a lot of complexity and noise, and we've just stripped it all back and gone, what, we're just going to look after you really well. Come to our restaurants and walk in the door, or book a table or the bar or the hotel, and we will give you genuine hospitality. So I'm as excited as I was by that chaos and that change, and throwing all the balls in the air and fighting for survival, which was a real buzz and a real energy. And I don't know if it's just because I'm knackered, and actually I need an extended period of downtime to recover from that. But I don't think it is. I think it's just that I love all the things that we got into the business for originally. I love the smell of fresh coffee. I love the clinking glasses. I love hearing the volume of the music at just the right level, and adjusting it over the course of the night so you can hear the banter and the chat and the conversation of people. That's what I loved, and everything else just became an unnecessary noise. So.
Super interesting, because I guess there's a lot of people that have done all these things, and a bit in the, where should we go now? Should I stop doing something? Should I start doing more? Because again, the more complexity and layer you put in, harder it is to make it work and make it very special, because you can have too many touch points around your business. On your journey, Mark, is there some people that has been really influential to you? I guess there always is, but like somewhere you say that they really pivot my understanding of it as a human being and business owner as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you've probably got personal and you've got business. So certainly from a hospitality perspective, the likes of Danny Meyer, I think he's really, really good. His book, I've just the name escapes. He's Setting the Table, I think it's called, isn't it? What an amazing book that is, and insight into sort of the human aspect and the business aspect of hospitality. So yeah, a huge amount of respect for him, and he seems to walk that line really well around being a people business and looking after the customers and the teams on equal measure. So on a professional level, probably him. But actually, on a personal life journey, probably the 2 years that I spent traveling, the people that I met on that journey, I left the UK thinking the world was a certain way, and I came back knowing it was a certain way. And that thinking to knowing journey, I thought most people were lovely, and I thought, most people fundamentally, all they care about on planet Earth is, who they're going to spend time with that day, what they're going to eat, what they're going to drink, and where they're going to sleep that night. And that is hospitality. That's what we care about every day. Who am I going to spend time with? What am I going to eat? What am I going to drink? Where am I going to sleep tonight? And if I've got to get from A to B, then maybe how I'm going to do that journey. And vast amount of people on the world, they're not interested in politics or anger or hate. They're just interested in love and genuine hospitality. Hospitality is a door opener. I could rock up in a tiny little village in northern kind of Laos or Vietnam, and there might be just sort of mud huts, and there'd be no running water, and very little food. But these villagers would open their doors to me, and big smiles at their kids, and they'd invite me in and they'd pour me some tea, and I learned more from the genuine warmth of conversation without language, of smiles and touch, and look in the glint and the laughter in people's eyes, and the banter and the fun. I think I learnt more from those people than anybody else. Just that we are on this planet for a very, very short period of time, and whilst we're here, if we can break bread and we can drink wine and we can sit around together, what an utter privilege it is to spend time with people in that environment. So much more exciting than sitting at a desk and staring at a computer all day and tapping buttons. That's not the point of humanity. So yeah, I learned from the people that I spent time with on the road, and a couple of professionals.
I love that. You already mentioned Danny Meyer's book, Setting the Table. Is there any other books you would say people have to read out there to get inspired from?
Yeah. So you know what? I've got a few, but if I look at my sort of most gifted or most recommended books, I've got a few, and they're very different, but complementary, I suppose. If I start with a fiction book, then there's a book called Shantaram. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Shantaram by Gregory David. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I never heard about that.
It's a big book. I think I actually listened to it on audiobook, and it was something like 40 hours. But it's a fascinating book, and it's based in India, and it will just remind, if you've traveled at all, or if you love traveling, it'll just bring to life, the descriptions of life in the sort of backpacker hostels of India, and it's just really cool. So I really love it. So I recommend that one. Off the back of my own journey into changing my diet and learning about diet, there's a book called How Not to Die by Dr. Greger. All about food fundamentally, and how food, it comes down to the nutritional aspects of what we do. And I think if you're a chef or you work in restaurants, then you should read that, because it's so easy to tweak food and make it more nutritionally dense for humans, which I think is fundamentally key. There's a cool book called Miracle Morning by a chap called Hal Elrod. Yeah, have you read that one?
Yeah, it's over there on the shelf.
Is it? Perfect. I mean, that one, I'm a big believer in, get up early, seize the day, do some exercise, bit of meditation, some journaling. The biggest one for me, around gratitude. If you wake up every single day, or even just, 4 days of the week or whatever, if you write down 3 things you're grateful for, it's really hard to be miserable. It's really hard to not leave the house inspired and energized every day. If there's one thing that I could encourage people to do, some sort of journal, but just write down every morning or evening, if that's your time of the day, whenever's best for you, but just write down 3 or 4 things that you're grateful for. And that might be where you live, or your family, or your business, or the air that you breathe, or something that you've done at the weekend, or something that you're looking forward to. But if you do that, fundamental change to headspace, and Hal Elrod's book probably helped me to understand that. And then one more, Michael, if you don't mind indulging me, but I've just finished, literally just in the last few days, a book called The Shepherd's Life by a chap called James Rebanks, and he's a farmer up in the Lake District, and the Lake District is probably one of my favourite places. I'm off to the Lake District week Saturday, and I'll be there for a couple of weeks, and I go there most years, and if I didn't live in Bournemouth, I think I would live in the lakes. But his book is all about this sort of the tradition of Herdwick sheep, and the traditional farming that can be traced back thousands of years in the Lake District, and fascinating for me, because I say about this sort of insatiable curiosity is this juxtaposition between wanting to eat and as much plants and have an impact on the environment, but also wanting to support traditional farming that really looked after the land, and what James talks about in his book is something that we could lose. And I think I did a podcast with the Lake District farmers who supply amazing quality animals to some of the best restaurants around the country, but particularly in London. And I struggle a little bit myself. Is there a place for eating animals? And I think there certainly is globally. Whether we need to do that in the UK, we're very privileged in the fact that we don't need to. But if we are going to do it, let's at least support these sort of artisan, traditional farmers who love the land and the history of Britain, but also care about animal welfare and ethics. So that's a really good book to just get you excited about the sort of farms that we should support and the sort of farms that we shouldn't.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. Another friend of mine just recommended that book a couple of weeks ago, and because we had this conversation about eating less but better, and it was around the meat conversation where I said, I'm principled not against meat. I just think we need to eat less and better, and not there's just been an article recently, a couple of days ago, in the Guardian about the supermarkets pushing, cheap meat, which is not going to help with either climate change or the quality of health of people. So it's not about not eating meat. It's actually about eating maybe less and better. Like when you've been traveling in the east, they maybe eat meat in China and so on, but it's for the flavor, and you maybe have a very little piece of pork for a whole week, but it's very good quality.
Yeah. And if we're really going to change the dial on this, it's so important that we understand, which is, what I've been trying to get my chefs to understand is, this isn't about getting 1,000 people to go vegan. This is about getting 1 billion people to eat less meat, and there's a big difference. If you go to everybody and tell them, they've got to be vegan, vegans do a disservice probably to this genuine debate. But the plant-based movement, the flexitarian movement, and it needs to be, significant. It can't be, okay, there's going to be one lunchtime a week where I don't eat meat. If we can get down to a couple of days where we do and 5 days where we don't, but just start somewhere. But like I say, to change the impact on the environment, we need to get 1 billion people to change their habits, not 1,000. And I think that's key.
Yeah, that's so spot on, Mark. So is there any lessons that this is a really interesting question, I think, for you being in the business for 17 years with your own business? Is there any lessons the universe keep on putting in front of you?
I don't know. I think maybe the universe says, you can probably tell from this conversation that I'm a bit of a hippie and I'm a bit of a lover of humans. I'm not sure if the universe tests me. I think it regularly reminds me of what I fundamentally think is important. And like I say, that constant going from thinking to knowing, I think, is key. As I get older and wiser and I learn more, it reinforces this. Life is an adventure. Life is short. Ask the why of what you're doing. I want to spend more time. I love business. I love the success. I love the community that we create around business, and financial independence and success is brilliant. But it shouldn't be at the expense of time with your partner, or time with your kids, or time with your dog. Or I was lucky enough last year to go and do the Tour de Mont Blanc, which is a 110-mile walk around the mountains in Mont Blanc. I'm hoping to get to the Atlas Mountains in Morocco this year. I regularly go on quite long cycles, and don't get me wrong, this isn't because I'm some lucky git who made loads of money, but I just make sure that I carve time into my diary. I have a calendar on the wall at home where the kids and I make sure that we put in a little mini adventure every month, and it might be as simple as just a walk in the forest, or it might be lucky enough that I went snowboarding with my son a few weeks ago, but it's remembering to recognize that we are just here for a blink and an eye. It is such a nanosecond when you look at humanity's time on Earth, let alone Earth itself. So what the universe seems to do a very good job of reminding me is that if you're genuinely going to work in hospitality, it's back to that authenticity. As it means you must love life and you must love people, because it's hardwired into you. It's a reflex, and that is around sitting around the table and breaking bread and drinking wine and having conversation. And if you're going to do that with authenticity in your business, then I don't believe you can sacrifice your family or your friends. And I have done for periods, don't get me wrong, in the early days of growing the business, but this comes back to that. Don't just keep grow and sacrifice. At some point, do that, get yourself into a position, and then remember, you're here for a very short period of time. And for me, life should be about adventure. And adventure might be your work. That might be your adventure, but it very well might not be. So yeah, listen, do a bit of meditation, write that gratitude journal, listen to what gets you excited, focus on the adventure, not on the cash.
Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. I agree with all of it. And I think it's also I think a lot of people have had these reflections in the pandemic. Now it's about taking ownership and making sure it happens in a way. Is there any advice you would give to other founders, business leaders out there right now you think they should think about, implement into their businesses?
It's difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, if I speak to people who are just coming into the industry, I'm always like, look, you can't unfortunately just be passionate about your product. You absolutely have to be. You have to have found a product, an idea, and a niche, or something that really excites you. Actually, I'm really excited by, you talk about a change in the hospitality sector. But if you look at the street food sort of concept, or the shared space, the street feast, or the Mercato Metropolitano or Cribb, or these kind of places that are facilitating people who can't afford to set up a restaurant to go and try a concept and try a product, that's really exciting. The barriers to entry are potentially less for people to try their niche and their idea, and that's great. I would just say, look, you do unfortunately really have to know your numbers. The failure rate in hospitality is huge. Spend some time getting your head around. And if you're running a hospitality business and you don't get, at the very least a monthly, profit and loss account, then please do. But ideally get it weekly, or if not daily, because it's tiny margins and it's going to get even harder in the next sort of few months. And you've got to be tracking that, really daily to know exactly what's going on if you want to succeed. So it feels like a bit of a boring and a bit of a grown-up answer, but I would just say, get yourself some good financial advice, and then go and practice first. Don't start with a 200-seater sort of dream restaurant. Go and practice by renting a container in a street food kind of place, and find out what the customer loves about you, and if you really love looking after people, because it's a privilege, like I say, to work in this sector, but it is hard work and it is antisocial hours.
Yeah, and you need to know your numbers. I totally agree with you, because if you don't make profit, you're not going to stay around for long, and then you can't make all the good things you want to change. So it comes with the territory.
Yeah, people think it's mercenary sometimes to, look at the numbers and be focused on the cash and all that kind of stuff. But you have to say, look, you need the cash to do the fun stuff and the important stuff. And it's no good just being a bit of a hippie and going, look, money's not important. It's not about the money. It's about love. So you got to have the money to do all the cool stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, Mark, if there's any questions you wished I've asked but I didn't, what would that be, and what would you answer?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, one of the favorite questions that I ask people, or they get asked, is what does success look like? And I think we've touched on that. What success looks like to me is a balance and it's adventure. But it's just one of those key questions that other people should ask themselves. Is what does success look like to you, and spend some time thinking about that. And don't spend some time thinking about it whilst surfing the internet. Go for a walk in the forest, in the woods. Go and walk your dog. Go and spend some time on the beach, and just question yourself, and say, right, okay, what is success? But I think we've covered it, Michael, and I've really enjoyed chatting to you. So thank you so much for finally giving me the opportunity.
Great, Mark. I really loved this conversation, and I will make my way to Bournemouth. I promise you. I promised you that earlier, but I will make it happen this year.
Think of how long we could talk with a cold beer overlooking the beach, Michael. My goodness.
Oh yeah,
we'll a few spare batteries.
we'll solve the world. Where can people find you, Mark? If they can jump on the train or in the car and go to Bournemouth and stay for a couple of days, of course, that would be lovely.
That would be perfect. Yeah, come down to Bournemouth. The website for the business is urbanguild.co.uk, and that links through to our few venues. So we've got a little hotel, we've got a cool restaurant on the beach, and we've got a pretty significantly sized place right in the heart of the town centre in Bournemouth, and it's a cool place to visit. But if you can't come physically, then digitally. I'm not actually particularly good on social, but I'm on Instagram and I'm on Twitter, and my handle, as I think the cool kids call it, is just Mark Cribb. So MarkCribb. It's the same on both. And message me. I may not be overly efficient at getting back to you, but I will do my very best.
Yeah, and check out Mark's amazing podcast. Even though it's idle, there's some great relevant conversation in there about the industry, humans of hospitality. I would really recommend you that as well.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Yeah, humansofhospitality.co.uk. Really rewarding to see that people are still downloading that and listening to it on a weekly basis. And there's some great learning in there, and much of it. Some of the COVID stuff might be a little bit dated, but a lot of the conversations are still relevant. So yeah, have a listen, and hopefully I'll get that back on the air once life is a little bit more under control. But it's certainly not going to be in the next couple of months, Michael, while we ramp up for summer.
Good. I'll send you and the team and everybody around you power, love, and energy for the time ahead. And thank you so much for coming on the show, Mark.
Real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark, for your deep dive into how you are navigating a new paradigm of hospitality as an independent operator. You should now sit down and reflect over, how can I make sure that my business has built a strong and authentic connection with my local community? To get further inspiration on how to build a strong and authentic connection with your community, tune in to episode number 13 and 14, Staying True to Mushroom with Carl Jones. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share, rate, review, or subscribe to one of our channels. which now all can be done by our new website at hospitalitymavericks.com. A big thank you to BizSimply for supporting us, bringing great insights, strategies, and tools to help the industry thrive, not just survive. Check them out at bizsimply.com or on their social at bizsimply or bizsimplyhq. You can also email them directly at advice@bizsimply.com. A big thank you to Fina Charlson, who is the show producer and editor from the Podcast Collective. Tune in next time for another interview, and in the meantime, find out more about us and subscribe to the newsletter and more Maverick insights at hospitalitymavericks.com. Don't worry, if you didn't get all of this, there will be links in the show notes. I'm Michael Tingsager, and you've been listening to the Hospitality Maverick podcast show. Be Maverick.